You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Lian Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. And the next available way you can walk that path is through joining our new crucible, Waking the Wild Heart. This is for you if your heart desires to express its wildest, most vulnerable truth. If your heart aches to be liberated, to be loved and to love at the deepest level. If your heart is calling you to lead your whole life, not from fear, but from love. If your heart longs for you to become someone of depth, power, and presence. And if you know in your heart that you're ready to create a life overflowing with wild love, pleasure, expression, and purpose. We begin on Thursday, the 3rd of September. There are a few places left. So if you are feeling in your heart that this is for you, go and claim your place now at primalhappiness.co/WTWH. Now into this week's show. It's a bit of a kind of one-off show format in that it's a recording of a Facebook Live I did for the Primal Happiness Facebook group in answer to a question that I was asked and actually had been asked several times before about the role of feelings, particularly when you come from a kind of non-duality spiritual path such as the 3 principles, which is often heavily focused on the role of thought. In this episode, I covered feelings, emotions, and sensations, spirit versus soul, anxiety versus sadness, embodiment, archetypes and activations, and ascension and descension. So it was a lot. It's the first time I've really spoken so, clearly and deeply, specifically to this question that I'm asked in many different ways a lot. So hopefully, if you've been wondering something similar about kind of what about feelings anyway, are they even important? This will be a really helpful show for you. Let's dive in to all that goodness. Here we are. Welcome to this very impromptu live. I love how this happened. So as I said in my post, this is a question I actually get asked a lot. And for some reason, when I received a message yesterday from a woman who was asking all about, I guess, this path of the wild feminine, the descent, the heron's journey, she asked something akin to that question that I shared along the lines of, what about feelings? If we're taught that they are ultimately, this is paraphrasing, if we're taught that they are just a manifestation of thought, is it something to even focus on, get caught up on, explore? And for some reason, I suddenly thought, I just noticed I get asked that something like that so often. And I don't think I've ever publicly shared my sense of that. I'm pretty sure I never have, which I don't even know why that's the case. Anyway, for whatever reason, I suddenly thought, this could be a really useful conversation to have. And then as it happened, when I posted in and then started to get questions and comments off the back of that, I was like, oh my goodness, this is just such rich territory to explore. So I then got really excited about doing so. And then as it happened, I was meant to have a call today, 11 o'clock, which was cancelled. So I was like, here we go. It was meant to happen. So that's the kind of story of events that's led us here. If you've only just joined, I'm going to kind of, I just explained my bandwidth was always, I live in the countryside. My bandwidth is just dreadful. So I'll kind of come in and out of Facebook. I'm doing this via Zoom. So I'll come in and out of Facebook to read any comments because I really want this to be really a kind of useful and engaging experience. I shared recently the way I do the all the everything Facebook lives. They're really a kind of making of the podcast. And so once I start recording the show proper, I'm no longer in a position to then kind of engage with anything that's coming up live, which is a shame because I really love that. But my intention is that this is going to be much more two-way. So I will, I'd love any comments. If you're digging what I'm saying or kind of like it's making sense to you, drop me a heart, drop me a thumbs up. Share whatever you want, and I will come back now and again to check what's being said and speak to it if I can. I will also obviously read those afterwards, and anything that I can't pick up in this session, I will come back to. Is there anything else I want to say? I think the main thing that really occurred to me as I was making some notes of areas that I would like to touch on was that there's a lot. There is such a lot of, again, really gorgeously rich ground that we can cover. And we probably only have until the top of the hour. So I'm going to get through as much as I can with the idea that a lot of this we're only going to be kind of just skimming the surface of. So as I'm talking, just notice what shows up for you, what you're feeling called to, where you're feeling kind of like your curiosity is being pulled, what you're noticing is triggering you, what you're noticing is that kind of like feeling of like, that's for me. What you're thinking like, what the hell is she talking about? That makes no sense to me. Like any of those things, if you can notice that and share that with me, that will be then something I can come back to in whatever way feels good. That could be that I do another one of these. This is actually doing this kind of more engaged back and forth live for the group is something I'm intending to do more often. So it could be that I do another one of these. It could be that I do a podcast on it. It could be that I can send you some resources, but probably every single thing I talk about, it's like a separate path or separate exploration, all of its own. So I can only like do a kind of very surface level exploration of it in today's course. So I'm saying that right at the outset, so you know that I'm really willing to go deeper into any of this, but I'll be guided by what's coming up for you. Hope that makes sense. And of course, that's still true whether you're watching live or watching the replay. Let me know what came up for you, and then we'll take it from there. I'm very much a believer that this path of the soul, this descent to the soul, is really unique to every person. There are some commonalities. There are things that I've seen come up over and over again with myself and with others, but it's always traveled best when we're looking for the next breadcrumb that's for us uniquely. And that to me has always been the thing that I really can see we can trust to guide us when we're feeling that pull to a specific topic, teacher, book, whatever. That's always the place that we can be guided by. So I can give those like, oh, I've seen this can be really helpful if you're feeling called to this area. But again, that's why I'm asking you to tune inwards and see what you're being called towards. I think that was the main thing I wanted to say. I guess the other thing is, again, I'm going to speak very much from my own experiences, my own philosophy. I will be speaking probably in some generalizations because sometimes it's the only way to actually like say something with any degree of clarity. But honestly, I am the least dogmatic person ever. If you disagree with me and want to fight me on it, you won't have any fight here. Like, go believe whatever you want. You will have zero argument here. I really am. I'm a believer in the idea of we can empower any belief that we want to. You know, whatever's going to serve you, go believe that. Ultimately, that's all life is a kind of collection of one belief after another that we see and then expand past and then create another one and then expand past that. So I will share with you what's looking useful to me right now, but it is with zero sense of like, this is the truth and you must believe it the way I do. It's like, I'm pretty much never coming from that place. Okay, before I dive in, I'm just going to check to see if there's anything in the comments that I need to attend to. It looks like it's all working. Yay. So we are all good. Let me get to my notes of the things I wanted to cover. Because as I say, when I started to look, there was a lot. Right. So I'm going to start with something I think most of you probably would have heard me talk about before. And this is the idea of there being... These aren't the only two paths, but these are the two paths that I'm mostly going to focus on today. One is the path of ascension, and the other is the path of descension. So ascension is the idea of transcending up out of this experience, our embodied experience, the experience of this realm, planet Earth, up into spirit. And of course, I'm using the word spirit. We could use any kind of word for that. We could use God. We could use the universe, oneness, whatever your version of that is. And again, this particular live is for people that have come from a path of some form of usually non-duality, some kind of spiritual path that has ultimately at its kind of like real heart, if you were to really look at the ideas and sort of follow them to the natural conclusion, is ultimately pointing to this idea of non-separation, non-duality. So if you don't have a belief in spirit of some description, I think this will still be a useful show for you. Call it a show. I don't know. Is this a show? I'm used to saying the word show. I don't think this is a show. But I will be referring quite a lot to that distinction between ascension to spirit and then what I'll describe in a moment, the descension to soul. So if you don't have that kind of experience, we haven't had an experience of the path that involves ascension to spirit, it's not the end of the world, but just notice that's what I'm talking about when I allude to spirit or non-duality or ascension. I'm talking about that distinction of rising up, transcending this human experience and having the experience of our non-separation. And the path that I followed into initially, I didn't stay on that path, but my first kind of introduction to that path was via the 3 principles, which I know a lot of you have come that path. There's many others. And again, more and more I see that they're ultimately all pointing to the same place, if it could be called a place. There's just distinctions into like what that journey looks like, how that's languaged. So if we see that as being this idea of seeing that these individual experiences as humans are an illusion, they're a really helpful illusion because they help us have this human experience, but they're an illusion in that we are made of, again, we can use lots of words. I sometimes use the word divine love. We're made of infinite divine love that have come into this illusion that's created, and in some traditions we'll describe that as created by thought, so we get to have this unique human experience. And it's that second part, that unique human experience, that we're going to be looking at when we're talking about this descent to the soul. This idea that, yes, we are made of all of the same stuff, and when we come down to these bodies with this unique drop. And what I've also seen is, and this is really become more and more apparent to me when I've spoken to lots and lots of different people from lots and lots of different paths, primarily from the podcast, I I really see that there is this idea of these paths to non-duality, and they can be broken down further to things like progressive paths versus direct paths. And then this other path, which is the descent, can be done via shamanic routes. And again, even that can be divided up in different ways, sometimes not even described as shamanic. But ultimately, what I see over and over again is they are still, even then, all leading back to that same place. If I speak to someone whose path has all been shamanic, they will be still speaking ultimately from that same understanding of our non-separation. That's true, whether they've journeyed through it from a shamanic place, or I speak to someone who's only focused on that path to non-duality. There is that shared experience, shared understanding. And what I've come to realize over the years where I've spoken to people who have come from a shamanic path and studied how we've lived for most of our time on this planet, i.e. that kind of indigenous lifestyle. And when I say indigenous, I realized the other day that because of our lack of understanding of indigenous cultures in today's world, sometimes when we hear that word indigenous, we can actually think of people who are still described as living an indigenous lifestyle, but are actually trying to do it in a place where the mainstream culture has made that very difficult. It's disconnected them from their indigenous roots. And so sometimes when we're referring to indigenous, I mean, if you do a Google search for kind of, I don't know, some kind of indigenous studies, often they'll come up with things that show high rates of alcoholism and things like that, because they're talking about indigenous cultures have actually been very separated from their indigenous lifestyle. So I don't mean that when I talk about indigenous cultures or indigenous lifeways. I really mean the way of life that was true for us humans for something like 94% of our time here on the planet. That's what I mean when I say indigenous, not what's happened in the last few hundred years, say. So where was I going with that? Yes. So when you look at the paths of spirituality that are embedded in indigenous cultures, and often we'll see that kind of directly through the shamanic path, but ultimately it's kind of baked in often to their way of life too. Again, what we'll see is that path, which is into the body, into the earth, into the soul, there is a kind of, it comes with, even understanding isn't quite capturing it. It's just like a knowledge, or like a baked in knowledge that at the heart of all of that is our non-separation. And so the journey into the body, into the soul, is only really taking you back to a realization you already have, that you already live with. It's not a kind of path to get somewhere. It's recognizing like that's what we already are. And we've come here as this unique drop. Let's explore that unique drop. I think that makes sense. Let me know if I'm losing you with any of this. These are quite hard concepts to speak to clearly. So when we come back to our modern culture here, our mainstream culture, what we notice is we have very high rates of what we could call mental ill health. So lots of, for example, anxiety. That's not, again, what we see mirrored if we look at indigenous cultures. If the book, which one is it? I think it's Original Wisdom. It's a lovely book. Let me show you the cover. If you're interested in anything I'm saying here about Indigenous lifeways, I can recommend a few books, but this one is one of my absolute favorites. Love, love, love this book. And it's one of those really beautiful illustrations of what I'm about to share with you, that we just don't see these crazy high rates of, sorry, when I said crazy then, that was a bit insensitive. I didn't mean crazy in the way it's just linked to mental ill health. These kind of extreme levels of mental ill health that we see in mainstream cultures, it just isn't happening. It's not to say we don't have the odd exception, but nothing like what is considered normal in our culture today. So for that reason, and again, from that place of understanding that people who were raised in Indigenous settings had a kind of baked in understanding of non-separation. For that reason, there was no need to have these direct paths. And when I say direct, I'm actually including, again, I said earlier, that kind of path to non-duality could be further separated into progressive and direct. I'm just, for the moment, just calling them all direct, as in they're directly pointing to non-duality. In an Indigenous setting, there's not really the same need to do so because they're living with that realization. I'm hoping that makes sense. I'm going to look at the comments now and just make sure I'm not completely losing everyone. This is kind of level of complexity I've not really spoken to in this kind of format before. So I'm hoping, okay, great stuff. Can you drop me a thumbs up or a love or whatever? Just let me know if you're kind of following this. Is this helpful? As I say, these are pretty complex ideas that I'm really hoping I'm able to articulate in some way that makes sense. But I really get that I'm moving fast through these quite complex ideas. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's now go again to most of us clearly aren't living in that Indigenous way. We're living in this very modern world. We're here managing to communicate via the medium of Facebook, the internet, and stuff like that. So all good. And that likely comes with this separation from this understanding of us being infinite divine love. That's where these paths to ascension come in beautifully. And so anything I say is with this absolute respect for the very, very, very real. Even utility sounds just crass, really, from what I'm trying to point to. But there is a very real usefulness of these paths to ascension, particularly, again, for most of us that have been raised in this mainstream culture without that understanding of us being one, you could say. So from there, those of us that have had this experience of some kind of path that ultimately has allowed us to realize our non-separation, that is going to likely be so beneficial, so allows us to create this sense of connection to inner peace, inner well-being, all these ways that people will describe that experience of understanding that non-separation, understanding us being that kind of love that we are. And from there, what I'm seeing more and more, that provides a kind of safety net that allows us then to explore downwards into our body, into our wounds, into our unique gifts, into the earth. And so that's our kind of modern way of creating that kind of like embodied understanding, that safety net that allows us to explore downwards. That again, if we were in a Indigenous setting, that would already be there. So from there, it makes complete sense. Of course, why wouldn't we explore these gorgeous vessels that we've come here as? Why wouldn't you? In fact, vessels isn't even quite the right word, because we're both a vessel through which this divine love pours, but each vessel is unique too. And each vessel has its own qualities, its own uniqueness, which again is, I see, the reason we are here. And really, if we're going to fully play the game of life, what we might want to explore. Okay, I'm going to take a breather, and then we're going to then move into the main question that brought us all here. But I really had to lay out that groundwork first for anything else I'm going to say to make sense. I'll just check again if there's any questions before I do so. Okay, looks like we are all good. Okay, so I am now going to talk about feelings, emotions, sensations. I'll probably move more into sensations in a bit. For the moment, we're going to be talking about feelings. And when I'm talking about feelings, I'll probably use the word feelings and the word emotions kind of interchangeably. But just to say, certainly for the moment, as I'm talking, when I say the word feelings, I really mean emotions. And this comes back to this question that for those of us who have traveled some kind of non-duality path, there would have been a point where we recognize that these individual kind of emotions that we're experiencing are being experienced from a place that you could describe as the witness or pure consciousness. And we become, I'm trying to think of the word, we create this recognition that we can experience life from this deeper consciousness, and I guess ultimately identify there rather than identify with our moment-to-moment thoughts and feelings. And again, from this idea that for most of us that have experienced life in this mainstream culture, that's going to be super useful when for most of us, we've had quite a difficult experience. We will have had, probably most of us would have had experience of like lots of anxiety, lots of feelings of insecurity, all of the things again that are really driven up from this experience of being separated. And again, particularly when we look at though all of those emotions that we can kind of group somewhere along that side of anxiety, understanding our non-separation can be really, really helpful in alleviating those. If we think of anxiety ultimately being this this conditioned over stimulus to the outside world, where we're seeing everything as something to be scared of, something to react to, something to close over, by then relating to ourselves as not being this in the moment human anxious experience, that can be really helpful. And I personally had a huge experience of that I'm going to share in the moment. So I just want to make a couple of distinctions here when I'm talking about anxiety, and then I'll share with you my own experience of this. The time where I see this is slightly different. And again, everything I'm saying here is massively generalizing. There's going to also be other things that are going to drop through the cracks of what I'm talking about. I'm just going to talk to you about one big distinction here that I see around anxiety in particular. For women who are experiencing anxiety related to their cycle, and that could either be within their monthly menstrual cycle or coming to perimenopause, menopause, the anxiety that can be driven up in those times, I'm not talking about. I'll do what I can to talk about that a bit more deeply when I talk about embodiment in a bit. But for the moment, I just really want to make that distinction. My sense of it is that anxiety is not an anxiety that it definitely can be alleviated to an extent through the understanding of our non-separation. I actually don't think that's the most valuable, maybe is the right word, most valuable way to hold it. So I'm just going to make that distinction, leave that there for the moment. So if your anxiety is coming from that, particularly what I also notice is many women that I work with have come via a non-dual path like 3 Principles, have had quite an alleviation of anxiety and stress, things like that through that path, but then are noticing this kind of upsurge of anxiety due to, for example, perimenopause, and like, well, what's going wrong? Why am I getting this anxiety now when I thought I'd kind of like, to a large extent, left that behind? Everything I'm talking about here is because of that. So I really want to, like, again, because I'm seeing that come up quite a lot with women I'm working with, I really want to make that distinction. Okay, let me just take a breather and a sip of my drink, and then I'll move into... Where should I go next? I was going to share my story with you. Give me a moment. And I will also just check if there's any comments. Okay, hopefully I think this is working. I never really know. I never really know. Excellent. Right. So where are we now? So my own story mirrors this quite well. So I had quite a big, profound, I guess you could say, kind of awakening experience in 2000 and I suppose it started actually in 2012. And then that was a kind of more gradual progression after I lost my father. And then I had a kind of one boom moment in September 2013. And as a result of that, which you could describe again, was a kind of a moment where I really saw deeply my non-separation and the role of thought in creating this illusion of separation. Because of that, I had a profound drop in my experience of anxiety. My panic attacks that I had experienced, I wouldn't say regularly, but I had experienced them now and again. Certainly there was a period where they were regular, and then they'd dropped to an extent, but I was still experiencing them after a traumatic experience that happened 15 years prior. So my anxiety dropped, my panic attacks completely stopped, and I had at the time chronic facial pain, which also related to that traumatic event. My chronic facial pain, which I'd had and tried so many different things to address, deal with it, that disappeared too. So again, when I'm talking about the benefits of the path of ascent, please understand, like, I absolutely get how amazing that can be. I've had my own personal experience. I am forever so appreciative of that path. Like, oh my goodness, I don't think I would even be sitting here doing this today if it wasn't for that particular moment and that path and everything that came from it. So anything I say is with complete honor and respect for that path and for my own experience. And yeah, just real gratitude of how that helped me. What I have also noticed is we can, and depending on the tradition, philosophy, lineage of the path itself, can get either we're directly told this, or we just kind of get this kind of human, like, it's a very human thing to like just assume things like this. We get the message that this path then is going to solve everything. If I just keep walking this path with more commitment, if I can get more grounded, if I can understand my separation more deeply, I will then have the experience of life that I want. We may not word it quite like that, but that becomes the lens through which we live life. My own experience has shown that that isn't actually, it's not even about whether it's true. I would say it's probably not either for me personally, and again, for the people I work with. I've seen it's firstly just not necessarily the most effective or efficient way of creating this kind of gorgeous, rich experience of life we might want to have. But even just like the path itself isn't necessarily the most kind of fun. I guess fun is the word that comes to mind. Interesting exploration that is on offer. So again, I'm saying all of this with complete reverence for the Ascension path and for all that it brings. And my message really is, it's not the only path. And I also don't believe it's the best path for certain, how can we put this? Certain obstacles or certain patterns, certain traumas, certain wounds, certain emotions, coming back to emotions, that we can walk. And what I've really seen is when it comes to, let me pause actually, because this is a whole thing in itself. Let me just, I'm going to check again to see if there's anything. Again, drop me some love, thumbs up, hearts, if you're getting this, if it's making sense and it's helpful. And let me know if there's anything here that's like you're not following, isn't making sense. Again, it might be that I can clarify now, or I'll take it off and give you some other way of us deepening into that inquiry after this. Okay. So why might we want to walk this other path, this path of the descent. And again, when I'm talking about ascension and descension, if we see ascent is to becoming transcending these physical experiences and realizing our non-separation, the descent is really the opposite. Ultimately, all roads lead to the same place, but the idea is we're going down into the body, into the soul, into the earth, into often our old wounds. Like, why would we want to journey there? And what I often see is there is what we could call the call. And this call can come in many forms. It often comes via an experience of heartbreak, grief, sadness. That could either be a kind of one-off experience, like a loss. It could be an ongoing experience of that, where we just recognize, like, this isn't really the life that I want, and I feel sad about it. And this sadness, or this lack of sort of feeling a sense of this is the life that I want, can be showing up either in a sense of a lack of purpose, like I'm not really living this kind of embodied, activated genius that I believe I came here to be. And I'm going to talk much more about that on Friday in the next All the Everything. So I'm only going to touch on this now. Or we may not have that deeper sense of kind of soul and kind of like who I came here to be, but we may just have a real sense of this isn't the lifestyle I want. This isn't the relationship I want. This isn't the level of income I want. And so there is this real sense of like, there's something that's getting in the way of me attracting what I want, or the opposite. I know that I'm attracting what I don't want. And that's often the point where women, and I'm saying women, I don't only work with women, but most of my one-to-one clients are women, and this is what often brings them to me. They often, again, will have experienced already the path that we've just been talking about. And often they will have created some really amazing things in their lives, may have, for example, a really wonderful marriage or a really amazing business. And there is this kind of feeling of stuckness that it doesn't seem to matter what I do, how profoundly I understand my non-separation. I can never seem to shift this cycle, this pattern that I seem to go into over and over again when it comes to my, living my soul purpose, or creating the kind of relationship that I want, or being able to earn money. And so that is what I see is a call to that descent into the body. And often, and this is where the kind of the painful part comes into our old wounds. And for me, this is very much because the medicine we came here to be. And when I say medicine, I don't just mean those of us who are working as kind of change workers and coaches, but I believe that we all are a unique gift. We're all a unique gift to the world. We're all medicine to the world. And that medicine is forged in our wounds, and they are in our bodies. They are held in our bodies. And so when we are choosing into being in relationship to them, which you could, another sort of differently put, is to bring what's in shadow into the light, we get the opportunity to see these patterns for what they are, what created them, why they're there, and we get the opportunity to integrate and expand past them. And I haven't seen that it's possible to do that by ascending out. I've only seen that's possible by descending into them. And again, I'm saying this with all this sense of like, probably there's exceptions. I'm not even saying like this is absolutely truth. I'm sharing with you my own experiences personally and working with others, and the kind of philosophies and the commonalities I'm seeing that have been crafted through those years of working this way. Is how am I doing for time? Gosh, this is flying by. We're covering a lot of ground. Okay, so I'm going to say one more thing on the call to the descent, and then I'm going to finish with a bit about some of the things that that descent can be made up of, and also just try and cover some of the other bits and pieces I saw that you've asked me to talk to. So that's how we'll finish. I'll try and get as much in that last bit as I can. Just double check that you're all still with me before I dive in. Okay, so the last part about the call and the descent into the body, into our wounds, into soul, is it's a path that is best done with the help of others. And I'm not saying that because I am a coach and teacher and I want you to hire me. It very much is like I'm not the only one that can guide you along this path. There are many ways. And I think there are as kind of many guides as there are kind of individual paths into the descent. And so again, this is where I'm saying really be guided by what's coming up for you. Whatever that next breadcrumb is for you, there will be a form of guidance that will fit within that. Someone really is a someone, ultimately, someone who's walked that path before that can shine some light on it. And so again, if you let me know what's coming up for you, I can then share with you what I've seen about that. For example, if you're feeling a call into a kind of more of a nature-based path, there's amazing teachers that have come through the lineage of Bill Plotkin that really can guide very specifically into that path. That is actually encompassed in our path too, in our work, Awaken the Wild. But like, if you really specifically only want to focus there are people who very much are equipped and, you know, passionate and are expert in that particular path. So, but what I would say is, this is, you know, a choice to journey into the underworld. Like, really, we need guides to do so. And I don't know how I would have made it through alive without the guides that I've had, which have come in many forms. You know, my own coaches, friends who have walked this path, friends who are kind of like walking along this path alongside me, like books, people who I don't know personally, but who have guided me via things like books and podcasts. So we need them all. Okay, finally, talking to when I'm talking about coming back into the body, another word for that I sometimes use is embodiment. And I want to make a little bit of a distinction here that just because we're talking about the body, just because someone's including the body as this idea of understanding, like these are these sensations, this body is happening now, and we can kind of use that experience as a way to kind of get back to that sense of non-separation. Yes, we're talking about the body, but that's not what I mean when I'm talking about really descending into the body and when I'm talking about embodiment. So primarily when we're talking about embodiment, this is allowing ourselves, and when I say ourselves, again, we could talk about this as soul. The way I hold it and the languaging I use is this idea that this drop, this unique drop that we came here to be, I call our soul. You might have a different word for it, a different way of feeling it, but ultimately that's what I mean. And this work of embodiment is allowing our soul to attune fully through this gorgeous medium of our bodies, to resensitize, so that we are, I love the terminology felt sense that people like Peter Levine talk about in books like Waking the Tiger, where this felt sense where we're fully able to be in relationship with those tiny sensations that are constantly rippling and cycling through our bodies. That in our culture, it is so misunderstood, dismissed, even demonized. Like this idea that this is important and has value. We're absolutely not told that it's valuable. You know, from quite an early age, children are often criticized for being too sensitive. And so this idea that our senses, this felt sense, has value, just isn't something that's really held in our culture as something important. So really what we're talking about when we're really talking about embodiment is this idea of understanding ourselves deeply through the medium of our bodies, our felt sense, which then becomes important because it then creates this kind of like a feedback loop where we are so in touch with this unique, because again, this is the part of us that's unique, really. We have this unique soul that's come into this body to have this unique experience. When we're able to actually fully feel, we can also feel what's for us. This is when we are deeply connected to the entirety of our experience, but particularly our heart. We can feel like this is for me, this isn't for me. I'm a yes to this, I'm a no to this. So we then have the ability, I mean, you can call this words like instinct and intuition, but ultimately we have this ability to really feel what's for us. And what else is there? I'll really quickly, I'm aware that I'm just at this point probably starting to blow people's minds. I'm just going to quickly talk to trauma and also how this relates to these wounds that we're holding in our bodies. Again, this is something that's fairly kind of new research and science, like in the last 30, 20 years, something like that. But again, this is really, we're talking about our body's ancient intelligence that was again known in Indigenous settings. Our body knows how to shake off trauma. If you look at other animals in nature, when they go through a traumatic experience, so a gazelle that's kind of been attacked by a big cat and then has been able to get free, they'll go through this natural cycle of shaking off trauma. And so they'll come back from it and be fine. It'll be something they've moved through and come back the other side without what we would describe in our culture as being something like PTSD or panic attacks or anxiety. All these forms, again, of how we then experience the effects of trauma that get captured in our body. Again, I love the work of Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk, I think I've said that right, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score. And the work of people like them, where they're talking about the effects of trauma being held in the body, frozen in the body, literally frozen, energetically frozen in the body. When we can do the work to resensitize and be in relationship to those wounds, we thaw that trauma. We then, again, we could see it's like we have more energetic capacity to be living fully, to fully inhabit these bodies and to live into this world in the way that we came here to be. And so some ways that I found can be really helpful lenses on this. And again, none of this is like, this is the only way, this is the best way even. It's what we've discovered. When I say we, Jonathan and I, the co-founder of Primal Happiness, we've found is, I guess, the ways that we have called to us. I suppose that's kind of like the best way to put it. Again, this is what we've found, that kind of soul alignment too, and have found really useful ways to work with people, ways to journey into the soul, into the body. So one of those is this idea of masculine and feminine embodiment. And so, as I was talking about earlier, what I've really seen with my women clients is we have these moments in life where we're being called into something different. And this idea of anxiety through the lens of these initiations that happen in our lives, like perimenopause or menopause, this is one of the ways that we get called into our bodies, into relationships, like what's our body asking for? This isn't something to transcend out of, to bypass. This isn't a call to journey into and see what the body's asking for. So there's, again, I could say so much about the idea of masculine and feminine embodiment, but the idea is it isn't saying men have to be all masculine, women have to be all feminine. There's no should have. It really isn't even quite as binary as that. But the idea is like, if you're feeling that call to your body through that lens of feminine embodiment, which is pretty rare in our culture because we have a very masculinized, linear, productivity driven culture, for women to feel that call back into their bodies often will be a call ultimately to the feminine, to reclaiming our sensual capacity, to reclaiming a really gorgeous, deep relationship to our cycles, to our sexuality. And again, the same is true, but differently for men. And so again, this is just a choice. It's a path, and one that I've really seen has heart. And so if you're feeling, and just to come back to this, I think what led to this question that I got that led to this live was me sharing the heroine's journey. And one part of that is this yearning to reconnect to the feminine, which I just keep seeing. This isn't a kind of idea that I've come up with. This is something that we are seeing universally. Not again, when I say universally, I don't mean for all women, but it's a universal cycle that women are feeling called into. This sense of like wanting to reconnect to the feminine, to softness, to fluidity, to surrender. So again, I could say so much on that, but hopefully that's given you a taste of what I mean when I'm talking about embodiment, and particularly through the lens of masculine and feminine. I'm just going to take a mouthful, and then I'm going to touch on archetypes and activations. And then I think I've covered everything that I was planning to cover. And again, I've moved at speed here. So if I've lost you, let me know. If there's anything that has come up as questions on this, do let me know. Okay. So archetypes. Again, this isn't saying like this is the thing everyone has to be interested in or journey through. It's again something that many people before us, but again, Jonathan and I just find a really a path that has real alignment for us, which is if we see archetypes as being universal patterns of energy. And so actually masculine and feminine are an example of that. These are archetypal patterns of energy that we've named masculine and feminine. There are others, many others. So the 4 Jungian ones that we often refer to are the sovereign, the lover, the warrior, and the magician. Other archetypes you've probably heard me mention are the idea of the wild man or woman, and also linking to what I just talked about, Jung, the king or queen. They're the ones you'll probably hear me talk about a lot. I also sometimes refer to goddess archetypes. There was a book that I recommended that I love. It's here, actually. I'll show you the cover because I love the cover. I recommended this one, and also the author's done another one, Goddesses in Older Women. And if you're feeling the call to goddess archetypes in particular, that is a gorgeous book. And the idea is that, again, really tuning into what's for us, what we've been called to. These are patterns of energy that we can feel that activation happening in us and allow to create a sense of, how could we see this? Like modeling almost. Instead of it being a kind of real life person creating this modeling and activation for us, we can use these universal archetypes as these energetic patterns that we can expand into. So we're trying to ignore the dogs. And so we can do that in so many different ways. Like there are many, many different archetypes, and there are many, many different ways of doing this work of embodying and expressing those archetypes through our own bodies and lives. We're just going to ignore the dogs and hope they stay quiet, they let themselves out. And again, if I really don't have time now to kind of go into what those ways can be. But again, just noticing if you're feeling that kind of like prick of curiosity, a calling to like find out more about, for example, the wild woman archetype. A wonderful book, for example, that I can recommend is Women Who Run with the Wolves. Like that's all about that wild woman archetype. So there are many paths, many resources, but I just want to talk specifically to that because that was a question I was asked. Okay. Is there anything else? Oh my goodness. I'm actually going to just bring it back before I finish, just this idea of emotions again, and how I think depending on where we are on our path, where we are on our journey, I think that idea of emotions can either be seen as something unimportant, something to transcend, and sometimes that makes total sense. Sometimes they can be this gorgeous portal into what's next for us. And so it's both. Coming back to that question, what about feelings? Like, do they have any relevance? It depends. And you'll know where you are. If you're at that point where being freed from anxiety, from stress, from kind of taking what seems like the way life is coming at you in this way that's, serious and painful, if you haven't already traveled that path of ascension, that's likely for you. If you have, and you're feeling that call into the body, into descending, then emotions then take on this idea of being a portal into yourself and into the soul. Ultimately, again, I'm not in any way saying there is like one way to do this, one right way to do this. Just whatever is going to allow you to, in fact, this card, I draw a Divine Feminine card, oracle card, that's kind of like my card for the week, every week. And this one I forgot to change. So I've had it for 2 weeks, but it's come up in conversation so many times. It was obviously meant to be that way. And I don't know how well you can see it, but I'll try and show you there. But this last line, everything is material for my liberation. And that, I guess, is a belief that we can empower, a kind of mantra we can live by. How do we use everything as material for our liberation? How do we live as art? How do we use this world as our playground, this kind of paradise we're in? How do we use that as liberation? And ultimately, like, we get this opportunity to come into these genius bodies, and like, why not create and feel as much of the juicy experience that this life has to offer that we can? I think that's everything I wanted to share with you today. Again, I have whizzed through lots and lots of topics that could be at least one live all on their own. But I'm hoping that is a kind of taster of some things that you're going to know what's for you. So let me know what came up for you. Let me know what else you'd need. Again, I'm thinking what I'll start to do. I'm not even going to say for sure it's going to be one a month, but I think probably I'm going to do a live like this about once a month. And I'll also continue to do my All the Everything show, which is much more of a kind of like one way, me just kind of talking. So let me know what you want, what you need, what you're feeling called to. Thank you so much for all of you who asked this question, asked extra questions, shared your experiences. I absolutely loved reading them all, and I'm hoping this was helpful. Lots of love to you all, whether you are watching now or watching the replay. Bye-bye. So that's us done for this week. Appreciate that was a real deep dive into, well, let's say it was a deep topic, and I guess a relatively shallow dive compared to what is possible. It was as deep as I could manage in the time available. So if there's other things that you're wondering, questions you have, let me know. Always happy to expand on this further, whether it be in a podcast, webinar, Facebook Live, whatever. Let me know. I'm really open to exploring this more. It's a topic that I think isn't spoken very much about at all. So really happy to do so more. If you want to get the notes for everything I spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 292. And if you know in your heart that you're ready to create a life overflowing with wild love, pleasure, expression, and purpose, and if your heart is feeling called to waking the world heart, there are a few spaces left, and we begin on Thursday, the 3rd of September. So go and claim your place now at primalhappiness.co/WTWH. Really hope to see your face in circle when we begin on the 3rd of September. And if you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice and hit that subscribe button. That way you are going to get each episode delivered to your device as if by magic. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.